Here's a segment from a recent Gun Talk radio episode. You can listen to all the Gun Talk radio podcasts however you tune in, or check out guntalk.com for more. You know, I've been doing this on the air here for 27 years. I've been writing about guns for 50 years. Been talking about gun rights, gun politics for all these years, and I kept saying, most people on our side don't know how to play this game. It's like they show up at a football field carrying a bat and a glove, and they continue to get beat. They don't understand why. Well, finally, we have a handbook. We have a manual. We have a guide, a roadmap, if you will, frankly, on how to win. Let me welcome to the show Paul Valone. He is the president of Grassroots, North Carolina, and also the author of a brand new book, which I think is destined to become the standard. It's titled Rules for Anti-Radicals, a Practical Handbook for Defeating Leftism. Paul, this thing is fantastic. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Tom.
Oh, man, this is like a guy who has been in the trenches and been getting beat up, and you got all the scars and the bloody bandages and everything else, and you finally figured out how to win, and now you have a track record of winning, and you're turning around and saying, hey, guys, this is how we win. Here's your guidebook.
Precisely right. I've done gun rights. I've run gun rights activist organizations for 28 years, and so along that 28 years, I've learned a little bit about what works and what doesn't. And I found all kinds of books on Marxism, on political treatises. What I didn't find was a nuts and bolts guide to winning in the political arena. And that's exactly what I set out to, because I didn't find it, I set out to write it.
You know, we hear this phrase, you address this, people say, well, politics is the art of compromise. And I love this where you say, in truth, politics is the art of conflict, vectors of political force applied by a small minority. To which I want to ask you this question. If you had to say, what is it that we on the gun side get wrong so often or don't understand about this whole thing, how would you start?
Well, for starters, I often hear that activists and gun rights supporters say that our political system is broken. It's not broken. It actually works exactly as intended. It just doesn't work the way you think it does. People seem bent on trying to educate politicians. What I say in the book is that education rarely works. What really works is applying paradigms of behavioral or operant conditioning. I treat politicians like rats in a maze. They go down one alley,
so?
They go down one alley, they get a food pellet. They go down the other alley, they get the electric shock. They quickly learn which alley provides the food pellet, and that food pellet is them voting right on a given bill.
Well, and you point out, you say, look, it's really a matter of applying force in several different areas, none of which involve them understanding you. It's what's important to them. They're narcissistic. They need votes, they need money, and they crave the adoration that they get in that position. And if you deprive them of any of those, you now have their undivided attention.
Precisely. Votes, power, money, and public accolades. You gain strength by either applying or withholding those things to a politician. Typically, if we're trying to pass a piece of legislation, I send an email alert to about 127,000 of my best friends, telling them to call this legislator, and better yet, call them between 9 and 11 Monday morning. Shut the office down. The following day, angry voters. Then the following day, I send in the legislative team to say, hi, we're from Grassroots, North Carolina. I think you know what we want.
After you've melted down their phone system.
Absolutely. And quite often, I won't, if the legislator is one of my simpatico legislators, I will discuss the bill. If it's someone who's a fence sitter or hostile, I rarely discuss the mechanics of the bill. I just say, Senator, I need your vote on this bill. And then he'll go tell me all the reasons he can't do it. Senator, I need your vote on this bill. And that's what works, frankly.
But in order for that to work, implicit in what you're saying is that you must have the ability to follow through with your promise, not necessarily a threat, although it could be interpreted that way, your promise to take action, and then you have to be absolutely swift and sure in your actions so that they understand we will do this, and we have done this to others, and you might want to talk to the others who are no longer here. They don't have these seats anymore. We defeated them.
Exactly right. I tell people that you have to represent yourself as a person, a serious person on serious business who will get the job done. And that generally means organization. You'll often hear a politician tell you, well, I'd rather receive one well-written letter than 1,000 emails. Well, it's true. Actually, he'd rather receive no letter at all because then he can shaft you with impunity.
Right.
But the reason he would rather get one letter than 1,000 emails is because 1,000 emails, unlike that one letter, imply organization. And if somebody can organize 1,000 emails, they can organize 1,000 votes against him.
I once did something, and bounce this off of you, because this is kind of how the game is played. We had a state legislature who flipped on us, told us he was going to do something and did the opposite, basically lied to us. Okay, you go, okay, all right, got that. And we said, all right, in a state, you could go into that district. It's not very big in most cases, and the population is not very big. And we simply went to the local radio station, and I recorded a commercial, and I said, Joe Blow, your senator supports gun control. Please let Joe Blow know how you feel about him supporting gun control. Here's his phone number. It started running, and about 12 hours later, he's calling and saying, turn it off. Please, please turn it off. What do you want? And that's all it took. And this was like a $500 purchase on a local radio station. And then, of course, we turned around and sent a letter to every one of the legislators with a copy of the recording and what we did and said, this is what we will do to anyone. Boom.
That is precisely how grassroots mobilization works. Okay? A lot of gun groups like to hire lobbyists. And what they don't realize is when they hire a lobbyist, the lobbyist has an inherent conflict of interest. He's working for multiple other interests. He cannot afford to tick off a politician. And so he's always going to be on this. He's always going to be on the side of compromise. And frankly, the politician in that case will always control the relationship with a lobbyist. Whereas if you are a grassroots mobilization activist representing not the politician to the people, but rather the people to the politician, what happens instead is that you control that relationship because you can withhold or apply votes, money, power, and public accolades, just like you just talked about.
Yeah, there it is. Paul, hold on a second here. We're going to take a quick break. We're talking with Paul Valone. He's the author of the new book. I suggest you jump on Amazon and buy this. The title of it is Rules for Anti-Radicals, a Practical Handbook for Defeating Leftism. Our number is 866-TALK-GUN. When we come back, how do we go from somebody who says, yeah, I really want to support gun rights, to someone who can actually do something and make things happen? We're going to ask Paul when we come back. It occurs to me, as I've talked about this new book, Rules for Anti-Radicals, a Practical Handbook for Defeating Leftism. We're talking about using it for gun rights groups. And we're talking with Paul Valone. He's the author of the book. But Paul, actually, this could be used for anything. I mean, if you're fighting the CRT or whatever your issue is, this is basically a book that tells you not only, and here's the important part, not only how to win in the legislature, but whether it be school boards or city councils or even just a one-on-one conversation with somebody who's trying to beat you up about your beliefs.
You are exactly right. This could be applied to a wide variety of issues. And essentially, I put the book into three parts. Part one is for the mainstream American who's concerned about the direction of our country one way or another, be it critical race theory or gun control, whatever the issue, or immigration, whatever the issue happens to be. And it tells him gives him tactics for dealing with leftists in daily life. Then part two of the book, if they want to get a little bit more involved, part two teaches them legislative tactics and how they can get involved with legislation, with organizations, and actually start making change. And then part three of the book is for the dedicated activist, how they can more effectively run an organization. Things like creating political action committees or incorporating 501c4 organizations, the regulations, fundraising, communications. So I hope Okay, I set out, and I hope this is what happens. I set out to write what I hope will be the standard conservative political action manual for, Saul Lewinsky's Rules for Radicals has been around for 50 years, all right, guiding the left. I hope to do the same thing with this book.
I think you have succeeded wonderfully. If you had to tell somebody, okay, how do you get off the fence where you say, yeah, that's a good idea, and you hear this all the time. They should be doing something about that. The NRA should be doing something about that. And I always ask them, what are you doing? How do you get somebody to move from that position over to being effective?
Well, first thing I tell them is that, they say, well, I don't have time for that. Well, the next time you're sitting down watching a football game, asking yourself maybe if you couldn't take some of that time to actually make some change that'll benefit your children, our future, whatever it happens to be. Other times people are afraid to get involved. They don't know how to get involved. Well, the easiest way is to find the organizations in your state that are most active on the issue you are concerned about, call them up and say, I want to help. What can I do? Now, sometimes the organizations will be good, and sometimes they won't. I did that back in 1994 after, watching the vote on the so-called assault weapon ban, the semi-auto ban. Right. And I called the organization, I called them the NRA-affiliated organization here in North Carolina, and I was told, write a 1-minute letter. That was it. So you started your own group. Two other guys and I started the organization, and we've pretty much been kicking tail ever since. That was in 1994.
Okay, that leads me to this question. Now, I am seeing, or we've known for some years, we've seen this, where you have fake gun rights groups that pop up during elections, and they're actually, a lot of times, they're formed by gun control groups or somebody supporting the gun control candidate, but they're a fake group with a good-sounding name. The other thing I'm seeing now, and this is kind of a two-part question, is not exactly fake gun control groups or gun rights groups, but they are supposed gun rights groups that don't do anything about gun rights, and they just milk donors for the money. And I'm seeing that on a national level and now more and more on a state level. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I just did a piece on that for ammoland.com. And basically, Tom, in 28 years of running gun rights organizations, I've learned that there are two types of groups that gun rights supporters should not subsidize. The first are groups that don't get involved in elections because it's election action that puts teeth into the group's legislative agenda. But the second is worse. There are a number of organizations out there, I call them phony gun groups, that are actually run by a small group of scam artists who make money in basically three ways. First, by doing what I call predatory fundraising, raising money on exaggerated threats or else on legislative threats they either cannot or will not actually do anything about. Second, by beating up on pro-gun politicians for allegedly not being pro-gun enough. And third, worst of all, by claiming credit for the work of others. But make no mistake, despite the slick websites and the social media, it's all about the money. And because they're siphoning resources from the groups actually doing things, they're actually doing harm to this movement.
So how does a person and you're getting these emails, you're getting all this stuff, they're going, oh yeah, there's this new gun rights Idaho, gun rights Missouri, gun rights whatever it is, and they really look good, and they got a slick website, and they're really doing great stuff, and they're kicking tail, and they are and I always love this, they're the no compromise group. And I say, oh yeah, that means that they're the no get anything done group, because we may be forced sometimes to compromise. We don't want to compromise our beliefs. But at the same time, anybody who says there are no compromise groups tells me you really don't know how the process works and you're a scam artist.
Yeah, I get calls like this all the time because we've got two groups that have tried to operate here in North Carolina, and I discover now across the country. I'd love to talk about that. But the best way to assess it is ask yourself, one, is it just a political action committee? Because a lot of times these guys will just form a PAC because they're tax sheltered that way. But a PAC is actually a very poor instrument for legislative change. So if they're just a political action committee without a not-for-profit organization, that's a red flag. Another red flag is the politicians they claim that are they're working with on legislation. a lot of times I've seen many cases where they claim they're, working with this politician on a bill and the guy's never heard of them. Okay.
Oh.
So I would ask the politician. Yeah, they did that to one of our bills. This group pops up, and we had a constitutional carry bill going, and they said, "Oh, that bill's terrible, and Representative Chris Millis's bill is better, and we're helping him draft that, and yada yada." I go up to Chris Millis and I go, "So what about this group?" And he looks at me and goes, "Who? You never heard of them?"
Oh, geez. Wow. Okay. All right.
The most infamous is the National Association for Gun Rights, or NAGR.
Thank you, NAGR.
Dudley
Brown. Dudley Brown, right?
Dudley Brown. Yep, that's it.
Dudley, I mean, look, exploits. I don't. Yeah, those exploits are out there. I mean, and he's the only person I've ever heard called a con artist from the podium at the gun rights policy conference. And I was just, it's like I thought, well, finally somebody said that. Wow, that's interesting.
Well, let's put it this way. Indiana State Representative Jim Lucas said in a tweet, and I quote, "Hey, National Association for Gun Rights, or NAGR, your group reminds me of a pack of jackals among lions. You sit back in the shadows while good people do the hard work, and then you swoop in after the hard work is done while taking credit for the kill." I couldn't have said it better myself.
And now I gather there are state groups popping up that are somewhat loosely affiliated with NAGR.
Well, I don't know if they're really affiliated with NAGR. When the gun rights community figured out what the scam was, suddenly they weren't making so much money, so they had to downsize. Now, you remember when when Jimmy Carter decimated the CIA, and
sure.
all the spooks had to go foment revolution in South America to make a living. Well, it's kind of like that. For example, here in North Carolina, we get Patrick Parsons, who used to work for NAGR. And suddenly he crops up with something he calls the North Carolina Firearms Coalition. Okay. Now, the first time I outed Parsons because he claimed credit for our legislative work. And I outed him to several thousand of our best friends. And we didn't hear any more from the North Carolina Firearms Coalition until this year, when we discovered the candidates who were filling out our surveys were also getting surveys from them.
Sure.
Now, understand that Parsons is from Georgia. He doesn't even live in North Carolina. And in North Carolina, their office, just like their office in Georgia, is a UPS store. Okay? I put a picture of it in a piece I put.
Hey, so Paul, I'm going to do something I never do, okay? I'm going to do something I never do. I'm going to hold you over the bottom of the hour because I think we're covering stuff here that's just so good we need to do it. This is just, if you've listened to the show, we never do this, but this is just too good. Paul, if you could just hold on here, we're going to come back and pick this up because there's some other things I want people to know. We're talking with Paul Valone. Go check it out right now. You can go online, look for the book, brand new book, Rules for Anti-Radicals, a Practical Handbook for Defeating Leftism. It's basically how you win, and it's a cookbook. It's a paint by numbers. It's just, if you do this, you will win. This is way too important to shortchange. Hey, welcome back to Gun Talk. I'm Tom Gresham. The hits just keep on coming from the chief financier of the gun ban movement. That would be billionaire Michael Bloomberg. He formed this group, Mayors Against Illegal Guns. I call them illegal mayors against guns. I just had the latest one, and there have been a whole bunch of them so far. The latest one is going to prison. Another one of Michael Bloomberg's gun banning mayors. Former Massachusetts mayor going to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Fall River Mayor Giselle Correa entered the Federal Correction Institution in Berlin, New Hampshire on Friday as required by order to begin a 6-year sentence. If I were a mayor and I were approached by Bloomberg's gun ban organization to become one of the mayors against illegal guns, I would worry about that, given their track record of so many of their illegal mayors going to prison. The hits just keep on coming. We got Paul Valone on, and I held him over. As I said, we rarely do this. He's the author of a new book, Rules for Anti-Radicals. And Paul, you just sent me a note. You said, actually, if people buy it from your website, you'll make a donation to a gun rights group. Tell me about it.
Go to Rules for Anti-Radicals, rulesforantiradicals.com. then
Okay.
each and every book I sell through there, I will donate $7 to gun rights.
Wow.
That's my pledge to them, giving something back to the community, if you will. But so rulesforantiradicals.com.
Okay, excellent. And I can just say I cannot recommend this book any more highly. This is going to become the user manual for the gun rights group. I had a thought, because I've been doing this for a while myself. There are sometimes people who want to testify on our behalf at legislatures, and once they start, you want to tackle them and pull them down and say, no, you're actually hurting us. What do you do about folks who are enthusiastic but really don't know what they're doing?
Well, I try to get them, involved in the organization in such a way that I can show them. I teach legislative tactics seminars, showing people that a lot of what they think is how politics works, they're wrong, okay? Politics is the art of compromise. No, it's the art of confrontation. I teach them little debating tricks like, for example, reject the premise, okay? Whenever somebody talks about gun violence, I tell them gun violence is a phrase invented by the left to make you think that death by gun is somehow worse than death by stabbing or bludgeoning or improvised explosive device. Death is death. Violence is violence. If they were really interested in reducing violence, they would reduce all types, not just violence by guns.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. And the left is very good at crafting the language. I mean, you go all the way back to Saturday Night Specials, assault weapons, ghost guns, sniper rifles. And anytime we use any of those terms, we validate their premise that there's such a thing as good guns and bad guns. And then once you've bought into that they can keep expanding the category of bad guns that they can get rid of.
Exactly. And matter of fact, the first part of the book, I go extensively into detail about rejecting the left's terminology, because if you accept their terminology and start using it, you've already ceded, territory in the battle. You basically now you're going to be operating from a position of disadvantage.
We were talking before the break about, I don't know if you'd call them false flag, gun rights groups, or there's just a weird thing going on in the landscape out there, and you've been looking into this probably as much as anybody. Can you give us an update of some of the other things that are going on there?
Well, as I was started to talk about before, in North Carolina, we have this North Carolina Firearms Coalition that has cropped up, has claimed credit for the work we have done in North Carolina, and is now, doing fundraising and that sort of thing, because it's all about fundraising. It's all about the money to them.
Sure.
So
right.
This North Carolina Firearms Coalition, I called them up, and the most fascinating thing happened. The guy who answered the phone was Chris Dorr of the infamous Dorr brothers, who, by the way, reportedly lives in Pennsylvania, not North Carolina. Nobody I've encountered from the North Carolina Firearms Coalition actually lives in North Carolina.
So who are the Dorr brothers?
As it turns out, Patrick Parsons, who used to run the North Carolina Firearms Coalition, is working for the Dorr brothers in an apparent gun rights scam, this one now calling itself the American Firearms Association, which is putting together a labyrinth of state-level entities. Now, there's a very interesting YouTube video out there by the Speaker Pro Tem of the Iowa House of Representatives doing an 8-minute diatribe on the chamber floor about another Dorr brother, Aaron Dorr, who runs Iowa Gun Owners, detailing how Dorr did nothing to pass a pro-gun bill while claiming credit and of lying to his supporters. And by the way, there is a website called DorrBrotherScams.com detailing how these five brothers are running a total of 28, count them, 28 organizations, raking in money not just on gun rights, but apparently they also decided to capitalize on the reopen movement as well. Okay? So 28 organizations.
Well, and what I'm hearing you say is that basically what they're doing is siphoning off donations that could go to effective groups. So, and I mean, they're not the only ones. I've seen other groups pop up, do that. I guess the question is, if you are an individual who's being, inundated with these emails and all this stuff, how do you vet a group? How do you know that the group is actually doing stuff?
Well, as I get phone calls like that all the time, and as I say, the first question you ask yourself is it just a political action committee? Because if it is, it's probably that's the cheapest thing to incorporate and to create, and allows them to remain tax sheltered without actually doing anything. The second question to ask is, ask the legislators that they claim to be working with. Have they ever even heard of them? Okay. And then, do some research, call them up, and find out what they claim to be doing.
Where's the track record? How long have they been around? That kind of thing.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of times, whatever you do, don't rely just on the website, because I'll tell you, these guys create some really slick-looking websites and really good social media. So they're very effective at that. They're very effective at gathering millions of emails, okay? And it's often, I understand, I've been told they sell them too. And then doing just, hammering fundraisers, with these emails.
Let me ask you a question. I want to switch from that to something else. Here, let me ask you. It seems to me, as I'm flipping through your book, and I haven't read the whole thing, I'm looking forward to going cover to cover because it's really good. One of the things I think I'm getting out of it is you don't really want to or need to be friends, or even, you can be friendly, but not necessarily friends with legislators. Is that correct?
Well, I tell people that my goal is to be reviled in all the right places, okay?
Okay.
I'm sure the Republican Party probably hates me just as much as the Democrats do, because I hold their feet to the fire.
Well, that's not a bad thing at all.
Grassroots mobilization, as I say, I use operant conditioning, B.F. Skinner stuff, and I treat them by applying rewards and punishments and getting them to do the right thing. None of this involves being friendly with most legislators. Now, obviously, if you've got good people that are good sponsors, okay, and do good things, get friendly with them. All right. For example, right now we've got a great guy running for the United States Senate in North Carolina, Ted Budd. This guy is the real deal. Okay. He's a gun shop owner, a range owner. He's got the best voting record on gun issues from anybody in the North Carolina delegation. He's a member of the Freedom Caucus, and now he's running for the United States Senate, and he's running against a rhino that used to be a governor here, Pat McCrory. So I strongly recommend people support Ted Budd. Now, there's a politician, legislator you can get, close to and friendly with.
Yep.
And, I've had good bill sponsors. But as far as the average run-of-the-mill guy who I need to vote right, he doesn't have to love you.
There you go. Paul, I'm going to have to scoot. I appreciate you staying with me for so long. I want to give out the info again. The book is Rules for Anti-Radicals. The website is rulesforantiradicals.com. If you buy a copy of it there, Paul's going to donate $7 to gun rights. Thank you so much for the incredible hard work. I know how hard it is to write a book, put this thing out. I really do think your book is destined to become the standard, the manual for us for decades now.
Well, thank you, sir. I very much appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. And look, welcome back here anytime, okay?
Thank you, sir.